I think it's important to admit when you're wrong. And it's important to admit when you're in my position, even when you might be wrong, when people are relying on you for the most accurate, factual information. And I don't think I'm, diametrically 180 degrees opposite wrong or haven't been in, the episodes of this podcast. But I think I've unfairly de-emphasized one thing and overemphasized something else. And it's really because of the influences I've had. So, a lot of people who've been in this podcast, a lot of people listening to this or watching this may have heard from, they really are more on the side of believing in terrain theory. And I'm starting to believe that although terrain theory definitely has validity, infections are significantly more important than we think. And they're even more important, that they're very important for the two main diseases that are the number one and number two killers in most of the countries that people are watching in, like the US and the UK. And that's heart disease and the C word. Those have a significant infectious component, potentially, I've discovered. And I think it's being ignored because like the mainstream Western medicine kind of acts as if we've kind of conquered infectious diseases. And then most of the diseases that really take us out these days, the majority at least, are as a result of, and depending on who you listen to, if you listen to the mainstream, they blame genetics and maybe some lifestyle. If you listen to the alternative, they blame entirely lifestyle. You're eating the wrong diet is the most common thing, but sometimes they also blame it on other things: exercise, sunlight, stress, whatever. But actually, maybe infections are much more important still for all of the diseases that we suffer with, or at least the majority of them, than almost anyone realizes. And I wanted to share some research that I've been doing recently today about that.
Hello and welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I am here with my co-host, Elwin Robinson, who just gave a lovely intro. He is the creator and founder of Advanced Health Genetics and also the Hormetics Weight Optimization System. And here we go, the author of the Rejuvenate Blueprint, which, well, you all being here, you will know about as we discuss the 7 steps to getting rid of chronic disease. So, Elwin, I loved your intro. I know we've talked about terrain. I know we've talked about infections. So I'm really looking forward to this new discovery of the studies that you've been having, because to be honest, yeah, you made a very fair point. A lot of us do think we've really conquered infectious diseases. So have we or haven't we?
Yeah, so let's quickly remind people very briefly what the Rejuvenate Blueprint is, and link in the description as usual to the full episodes of explanation. But the Rejuvenate Blueprint really is, it's identified the 7 root causes of all chronic disease, which is quite something. And of course, it's a brand new way of looking at things. It's not catching wildfire immediately, unfortunately, but it's slowly getting more and more fans, and I'm doing my best to make people aware of it. So that hasn't changed. The Rejuvenate Blueprint hasn't changed. However, very briefly, it's cause number 1, genetics; cause number 2, deficiencies, usually nutrients; cause number 3, excesses, usually toxins; cause number 4, imbalances; number 5, lifestyle factors; number 6, chronic infections; and number 7, emotional and psychological issues. And so I have yet to find any chronic illness that is not based on one or more of those. And so that hasn't changed. But I think there's a reason why I said that, number 6 is chronic infections rather than acute infections. I think acute infections are rarely the cause of chronic diseases. There are a few exceptions, like Lyme's disease, for instance. But even then, there's kind of debate as to whether it then becomes a chronic infection or not, which is something that we'll get into. But the point is, so 100 years ago, well over 50% of people were dying of acute infections, right? These days, people are primarily dying of, depending on which chart you look at, it's like, number 1 and 2 is usually heart, let's say cardiovascular disease, which would include, strokes as well as heart attacks and stuff like that. The C word, all the different variations of that. And then, overdose, actually, which includes doctor administered or doctor prescribed. And all of those things sound very not, related to an infection. And so I've been surprised recently, the more I've been looking into it, that actually, at least those first two that I talked about, they do have an infectious component to it. And let's just remind people briefly what the difference is between terrain theory and infection theory. And I have talked about this a few times before, so I'll just remind people with an analogy, which hopefully will jog your memories if you heard it before from me or someone else. So here's what the terrain theory people say to justify their position, which I think is a good justification. They say, what about if there was a garbage person strike and no one was picking up garbage anymore? And especially in a city where people often just throw their garbage outside. I've seen that, London, New York, whatever, they just dump it on the street, not even in the bin. What would happen eventually if that garbage kept building up more and more and no garbage person came along to pick it up and take it away? Eventually, it would attract all kinds of vermin, rats, let's say, being the most generally disliked thing that it's going to bring in. So suddenly all the rats are everywhere. And so what the terrain theory people say is, in that situation, would you say something like, oh, look at all the garbage these rats are bringing here? And they say, of course not, that's stupid, right? The real problem is the terrain. The real problem in this case would be the city streets, that they're covered in garbage and then they're attracting the rats. And so they would say it's exactly the same with infections and toxins. The fundamental problem is the buildup of toxicity, and that then attracts the vermin, which would be analogy for pathogens, bacteria, viruses, yeasts, parasites, all of these kind of different creatures that are bad for health. That's why I'm using the word pathogen specifically. So the ones that are detrimental, not just commensal, that often bacteria described as. So basically, they don't really do much. They don't do anything good. They don't do anything bad. But I'm talking about all the bad ones coming along, right? The ones that make you ill, and the ones that can even kill you. So that's their analogy. And so they say, it's foolish to be focusing on the rats. You should be focusing on the garbage. Clear away the garbage, and that'll take care of it. And this is only an analogy. But I was thinking about this, and even if you extend that analogy, it's not quite true. If you let garbage build up in city streets of a busy city for several months, and then you suddenly remove all the garbage, the rats don't automatically just disappear. Like, they've now got used to being there. They've got used to being bold enough to go that far. They've kind of decided that there are resources available to them there. And so they could still be creating trouble, right? Maybe if there's no one on the street anymore, they're going to try burrowing into your house. They're going to try getting in through it's amazing what rats can do. I'm not a rat expert, but I've heard them speak about it before. It's amazing what they can, dig through and chew through and all the rest of it when they're determined specifically. And I think that is where the analogy ends, because the more I look at it with bacteria, I do think the terrain people have a point. And the point is that unless you are quite unlucky, if your body is pretty pristine and unburdened by excess toxicity, your immune system should be able to deal with most infectious agents most of the time. There are definitely still exceptions, but it's a pretty good theory that's true. And there absolutely are people who I've met who've eaten and lived very clean all their lives and never been sick a day in their life. Like, that absolutely can happen. Now, there's still a genetic component to that as well, but still, it is true. But it is also true to say that infectious agents. Let's just talk about why it's true to say. My understanding of why it's true to say is because there is a great overlap between the body's detoxification systems and immune systems. And we tend to think of them as different things. If you were to just Google or AI it now, you'd be like, okay, so the detoxification system is mainly based on the liver, and then maybe the kidneys are secondary. And then the immune system is like based on the bone marrow and the spleen and the thymus. It's like different organs, different glands, different system. But what that kind of fails to acknowledge, and I don't think this is, again, if you ask AI or Google, it's not going to dispute it, but it's just not focused on adequately, is okay, but both of those systems are very dependent upon the lymphatic system. And this is where it kind of all comes together, including the whole thing about lifestyle and exercise. So if you don't move enough, the lymphatic system tends to get clogged. Also, if you don't breathe well, which often relates to stress, that can exacerbate or lead to the lymphatic system getting clogged. But here's the thing. So the lymphatic system is actually where a lot of the processes of keeping the immune system functioning optimally happen. But the lymphatic system is also the body's sewage system. It's where it processes and filters toxicity out of the circulatory system and brings it ultimately at a point of being, as I said, processed if necessary, or excreted if possible directly through the skin. And so if the lymphatic system is really clogged, again, could be other reasons, could be lack of movement and various other things. But if it is, then the immune system isn't going to function as well. So this kind of connection between an excess of toxicity and a vulnerability to pathogens is absolutely accurate and shouldn't even really be disputed from any mainstream point of view. The only mainstream critiques I've heard of this view are really just stupid. Things like toxins aren't a problem. A normal functioning body can deal with the normal load of toxicity in this world perfectly well. Even the reason I'm calling it just stupid, I don't normally just, use blanket statements like that, is because even if that were true, and there's so many arguments as to why it isn't true, how much things have changed in the last 100 years and all the rest of it, but even if that were true, the point is, okay, but what if you're not keeping up with it, right? What if you are struggling for various reasons? And what if a lot of people are struggling? Even if the amount of toxicity that the average person is exposed to is reasonable, what if people are struggling for various reasons? Maybe because they're eating too much junk food, maybe because they're not moving enough, maybe because they have too much stress, maybe because they don't have enough sleep, et cetera, et cetera. All the normal reasons that you hear from people, it can still lead to a situation where the body can't handle it, right? The body can't handle a level of toxicity. It can lead to the lymph being not flowing as optimally as you would like it to. And people who specialize in getting the lymphatic system moving, they tell me they rarely see people where it moves well. Now, of course, you could argue that the very healthiest people are not going to lymphatic practitioners, but even that's not totally true, because there's a lot of kind of people who are really into health who go to resorts and spas and massage places just to have a nice relaxing massage, and even they a lot of the time are the lymph isn't exactly moving optimally. So anyway, there definitely is that connection. Does that make sense so far, Chrissy, before I go to the next thing?
Yeah, absolute sense.
Okay, awesome. And so then with terrain theory versus infection theory, and going back to that rat analogy, the thing that analogy kind of misses is that some kind of pathogens definitely create their own toxins. And I guess that is part of the rat analogy, right? Like the rats will make their own mess, literally. They'll be excreting everywhere and stuff like that. And that's absolutely the case. Most of these pathogens are excreting toxins. They're consuming stuff and then they're excreting toxins. But then even more important and concerning than that is they don't just excrete it. They often build like fortresses of various kind of toxins and nutrients around themselves to stop the immune system being able to get to them. And so, Candida famously it uses mercury if it's available as a kind of shield to keep the immune system from being able to get to it, because very potent toxins like that will just inactivate any immune system agent, B cell, T cell, whatever that comes near it. And so that whole thing about biofilms is super important. And I've talked about it before, but we're going to get into it a little bit more. So that's the first problem. So even if the terrain people are right, and they may be, so you let the garbage build up, you let the toxins build up, okay. Then the pathogens came in only because there was all the toxins, okay. But now imagine you're clearing out all the toxins. Does that mean that the pathogens are necessarily going to go? I would say actually no, not necessarily, because the pathogens, at least some of them, the more successful ones, have this tendency and ability to create protective shells or layers around themselves, so that even once the immune system, let's say the lymphatic system and more, is no longer burdened with excess toxicity, it still doesn't mean it's automatically going to be able to get in there and just deal with all these toxin agents, which may have had several decades to ensconce themselves in these protective layers that are specifically designed for your immune system not to be able to get to them. Does that make sense?
That makes absolute sense. Yeah, it's not just cut and dry. Oh, get the pathogen out. Woohoo! Everything's cleared up and it's fine. That's not the case.
Do you mean get the toxin out?
Sorry, yeah, yeah. That's what I mean.
Yeah. And I'd say that because that is what a lot of people teach, and I don't mean to be critical, especially of people, who are in some way connected with the show, but I have to bring it up for the sake of just helping people to not get into that trap. I talk about this, like the mainstream alternative is all you got to do is change your diet and everything will be fine, right? And we talked about this before. I think I talked about in the last episode why some people genuinely believe that, so I won't go through that again. But then I'd say the second most common thing I see, at least these days, in the alternative or natural health world is this thing about if you just get rid of the toxins, everything will be fine. And it's definitely a better theory than the if you just eat well. First of all, because what isn't eat well is a matter of fierce debate, whereas what isn't a toxin isn't a matter of such debate. I mean, people can argue about how bad they are, but I don't think there's anyone saying that mercury is good. Whereas, pretty much anything found in food, there'll be some experts saying it's good and some experts saying it's bad. So it's a bit trickier. So at least with some of the toxins, or a lot of the most important toxins from my point of view, there is a consensus. Everyone can agree they're bad, even though not everyone agrees how bad or how much of a problem they are. So that's good. And I think it's a better theory than the diet theory because it is more accurate. It is true for a lot of people, again, that if they just clear their toxins out, that their body is able to function better and it's able to deal with whatever else is a problem. So, it can be true. But is it always true? And so, I think at the beginning of the last episode, I want to sidestep. I want to go back to biofilms at the end. I'm going to do a little bit of a weave here. I'll finish on biofilms, but let me take a detour to give another example of how important chronic infections are, even without the necessity of biofilm being there and being a problem. So I got to give credit to Weston Price for this theory. He was the person to originate it. And then maybe we should do a whole episode on Weston Price at some point. That would be good if there's a demand for that. And he was a dentist. All right, let's talk about who Weston Price is briefly. He was a dentist who decided, and I haven't prepared anything for this, so this is off the top of my head. He was a dentist who, in the early part of the 20th century, decided to tour the world and measure the dental situation, I don't know what else to call it, of people throughout the world with a specific focus on all kinds of indigenous people.
Genetic Insights provides cutting-edge, affordable DNA testing, giving you access to over 500 health reports that can help you in 3 key ways. They may be able to resolve your existing health challenges even when nothing else has worked. Using simple lifestyle changes, their reports can help you reduce your risk of developing future health challenges that you may be genetically predisposed to. And they can help you feel more confident in your health by showing you where you are genetically strong. Unlike most other genetic health testing companies, Genetic Insights tests over 83 million different variations in your genes, guaranteeing 99.7% accuracy across all of their DNA reports. They cover almost every aspect of health, including digestive issues, cardiovascular health, weight loss, hormonal and blood sugar balance, as well as nutrient needs, allergies and intolerances, and so much more. Using their system is quick and easy, and reading the reports is simple. If you've done an Ancestry DNA test, you can simply download your raw DNA data, upload it to the Genetic Insights platform, and within a few hours you will have access to genetic reports which give you a risk score for each specific issue and scientifically validated recommendations based on your individual genetic profile. Everything in your reports are based on scientific studies, and there are citation links throughout every report. If you are serious about optimizing your health and wellness and feeling great, then getting access to your Genetic Insights reports may be the most important health investment you will ever make. In the reports, not only will you gain insights into how to overcome existing health challenges and avoid future issues, you'll also discover which types of dietary, lifestyle, and even supplement protocols are best for your unique genetics. To get your unique genetic health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and use code REJUVENATE to get 20% off today. That's geneticinsights.co using coupon code REJUVENATE to get 20% off today.
The book is called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, and even if you're not a reader, it still might be worth looking at just for the pictures. It does lots of pictures showing people's teeth, and basically the conclusion that it's quite difficult to escape if you really immerse yourself in the book is that the modern lifestyle, and from Weston Price's point of view, especially the modern diet, is very unhealthy, because basically you see people who are, in the so-called developed world, and they need braces. Their teeth are all crooked and crowded, and they have narrower jaws like mine, and all the rest of it. And then you see people who are from indigenous cultures, and they have healthy teeth, perfectly spaced, no need for braces, etc. Now, and actually to expand on that, and he even he would show there's some tribes. One I remember, for instance, is like in Alaska, where some of them have continued to eat the traditional diet, and some of them, because obviously Alaska became part of the US, were eating like a much more standard Americanized diet. And the people eating the Americanized diet had terrible teeth, and some of them were even cousins, brothers and sisters. I think I remember there were even a few identical twins, where you could just see the difference between being part of that modern lifestyle and being part of that indigenous lifestyle, and the difference is quite striking. Now, Weston Price was definitely a pioneer, and he drew his own conclusions for that. And to be honest, he's one of those kind of diet people. He felt like it must be the diet that was the difference, and he felt it was especially fat-soluble vitamins which were more present in indigenous cultures that he reviewed, and he even kind of theorized some other nutrient which hadn't been discovered yet, which people say these days is probably vitamin K2. Sounds a lot like it, but that hadn't been discovered yet when he was doing his research. I've heard some people, claim that there may be more to it, and I would be inclined to agree. I would be inclined to agree that maybe the lifestyle, maybe the circadian rhythms, that one of them was the indigenous people were much more less likely to have electric light messing with their circadian rhythms than the people living in the developed world, because there was electric light reasonably common by the time he was doing that work. You could argue the stress of modern lifestyle versus not. Another theory is that the indigenous culture just required several hours more chewing a day, and that chewing would strengthen the jaw and then cause less of those issues. Another theory is that it's actually the foods that people are eating that they were allergic to a lot of the time, which then caused them to breathe more through their mouth, especially as children, which then caused the jaw not to form properly. I'm not an expert on this, so I can't remember it exactly, but it's quite well established these days. Some people even try and correct it in adulthood with techniques like mewing, it's called. There's other theories, right? So again, maybe we should do an episode on that. I'll get into that. But one of the other things that Weston Price talked about is the importance of having chronic infections and how it would dysregulate the immune system. And he especially focused on the dental infections, obviously, although not exclusively. He would also talk about how important it was if you had a fungal infection on your toenails to deal with that. If you have a sinus infection, all of these kind of things. But by far the most common chronic infection is in the mouth, of the gums specifically. And he talked about how important that was, and in that way, as many others, he was ahead of his time, because it turns out it's very important. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, back when we get to biofilms and heart disease. But I want to talk about another aspect I think I mentioned in the previous episode, and I won't talk about my personal experience yet in this episode because I'm still kind of in the middle of it, I would say. But I talked about how I'd recently had a tooth extracted, and the tooth that I had extracted was a root canal, and it's a root canal my only root canal, and it's one that I had been trying to get removed for over 10 years. And every dentist I went to, they said it looked perfect, there was no sign of inflammation or infection, and there was absolutely no reason to remove it. And meanwhile, both teeth on either side of it had experienced all these problems that, even though everything else was fine. And this is a long story I won't get into in this episode. But anyway, I finally got someone to remove it. And I'll tell that story another time. But the thing I wanted to talk about is, I kind of, by that time, when you get an idea in your head, you want to do something, and then it takes such a long time, by the time you do it, you can't even remember why. Maybe not, but I have that sometimes. I get, very determined, and then sometimes it takes a long time to make things happen. And I knew root canals were bad. I couldn't really even remember why. So after I had it out and had some complications, to make myself feel better that this was all worth it, I started to look it up again. And I was, really amazed at how important it is. So let me share a few different facts with you, and then we'll talk about a couple of studies as well. So it was, and this is just, I'm going to my notes here. So it was Weston Price, who originally, as far as I know anyway, in the modern world, which I guess it would have to be, as root canals are a modern invention. So he was the first prominent person, at least, to have this idea that when you have a root canal, should we explain what root canal is, actually, if people don't know?
Yes, I think that would be a great idea. Because, you've heard root canal, but you don't actually know what it entails.
Okay, so it can get to a point with a tooth. I had this root canal done when I was 21. At the time, I was poor, living in one of the poorest towns in England. I got it done in the NHS by a doctor called Dr. Barron, who my friends all nicknamed Baron Frankenstein because of how barbaric he was. He loved doing fillings on people without any
anesthetic.
Yeah. Although he didn't with me with this. I wasn't in a position to make to make intelligent decisions back then. I was smoking cigarettes all day. This is a different Elwin. So when you get to that point where a tooth can no longer, it's just going to cause you pain. You can't just drill the decay out anymore. It's too far gone. Then you basically have kind of three options. Option number one is just remove it and leave a hole. Done. Option number two is to remove it and then put an implant in. like a fake tooth made with something like cubit zirconia, usually titanium and stuff. This is really expensive most of the time, and certainly not available, as far as I'm aware, on like a national health. And then the third option is a root canal. And so a root canal is what they do is they basically kill the tooth, but they kill the nerve specifically underneath the tooth, but they leave the tooth in there. They just leave a dead tooth in your mouth. And the idea is that this is completely safe and a perfectly good idea. And, like I've been to countries where I remember, when I was in Portugal for a while and I had to have a filling done. This is over 10 years ago. I said, I don't want a mercury filling. And they go, ha, 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 ha. We don't offer those in this country, sir. We're more evolved than that. It was like they scoffed at the idea that would even be an option. Of course, it was in the UK. I think is it still done in the US, Chrissy?
To be honest, I don't know because I haven't had a filling for so long. But when I was younger, definitely. Yeah. But
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, maybe not these days then. I don't know. But anyway, those same doctors who would scoff at the idea of putting mercury in your mouth will usually still do root canals. I guess that's the point that I'm making. It's it's very common. It's considered to be a perfectly reasonable thing. But here was Weston Price view on it. Price argued that root canals leave behind dead tooth tissue. So that's inarguable. Everyone would say that they do. But here's a crucial point. He would say that they harbor bacteria, which then create toxins and potentially other pathogens as well, which can spread systemically via the bloodstream. Now, and I actually can't remember if Weston Price talked about this specifically, but I know people who are part of his kind of institute organization talk about this a lot, and they also talk about the meridian. So here's a fun little game. If you have chronic health issues and a root canal, work out where the root canal is. Is it like from the first from the middle? Usually they're more at the back, so is it the second from the back, the fourth from the back, right, bottom, top, left, whatever. And then Google tooth, organ, and meridian chart and have a look and see what it says in terms of what meridian that root canal is on. If you've got more than one root canal, do it for all of them. And then if you know anything about the Chinese meridians, probably that'll be enough. But if you don't, just quickly look up what that Chinese meridian means and what it's supposed to do, what it's supposed to govern. You don't have to believe in it; just look at it, what it's supposed to mean. And so, and I'll talk about a few examples in a second. You may well find that wherever you're having this chronic health problem, it correlates for you. And so, for me, for instance, most of my health problems over the last 25 years have ended up being in my large intestine and my sinuses. I think I've talked about both of those before, and usually on the right-hand side. And my root canal was on the lung/large intestine meridian on the right-hand side. And so I understand that's very anecdotal, so I'll just carry on reading. One example, a holistic dentist, Robert Jones, linked infected root canals to breast C-word via bacterial spread. What have the two got to do with each other? We'll get into that. He noted that 98% of breast C-word patients have a root canal on the same side and meridian as their tumor. So there's often that thing about correlation and causation. And so just because that is a fact, and I'm going to give more examples as we go, and it does seem to be a fact, almost everyone who has the C word has a root canal. But now, let's just say if almost everyone had the C word also had, I don't know, sinus problems, you could just say, well, it's not that the sinus problems cause the C word, it's just that people who tend to have one tend to have the other. That makes sense. And you could say the same about tooth problems, tooth infections. People whose immune systems are weak enough to have tooth infections or much more likely to be, have immune systems that are weak enough to be susceptible to C word. That's fair enough, but again, we're not talking about that. We're talking about a specific medical procedure. So that's much more causative than correlative, because like that's not like just another symptom popping up that you could say correlative. That's something that's being done to you. Does that make sense?
It
And
does.
there are plenty of other people who have teeth problems and they didn't have a root canal, and their correlation with the C word is a hell of a lot less, right? So, okay, a couple more examples. Dr. Joseph Issels, a German C word specialist who treated over 16,000 patients, required root canal removal as part of his protocol. He found that over 90% of his patients had 2 or more dead root canal teeth. Same thing, root canal teeth. His theory was that it was the toxins that were depleting antioxidants causing cancer. So different theories, but ultimately looking at the same correlation stroke causation. Dr. Thomas Rau, a Swiss breast C-word specialist, is especially breast of the type that there's been more research on. He reviewed 150 patients and found that 97% had root canals on that meridian side of whatever they had this. So if it was the right breast, the right canal would be the right side. If it was the left breast, it would be on the left side. So there's a few anecdotal, but admittedly with a lot of hundreds stroke thousands sample size. So let's talk about the theory behind it, right? So why might there be this connection? So root canals create a dead organ in the jawbone. And so inside the tooth, there are miles of dentin tubules. So, very, very thin, hollow tubes, microscopically thin, but still there, that can't be sterilized. So even if you were to get that tooth and kind of like spread whatever, everything, ozone, iodine, antiseptic, no matter how much you may think you've cleaned that tooth, you cannot possibly have got inside there and cleaned every millimeter of it, right? So that's the first thing. So up to 50% of bacteria survive the disinfection, mutating into anaerobic forms that produce potent toxins. So this was, to me, the fact I'm about to share with you now was the most interesting thing to me. The Toxic Element Research Foundation, shortened to TERF, they analyzed root canal teeth with DNA sequencing, right? So root canals eventually removed, like mine was. Get it? Do DNA sequencing on it. What do you think they found? 100% bacterial contamination. They never found one root canal extracted tooth that wasn't contaminated with a bunch of bacteria. Every single one always was. But here's the more important point. With 400% more bacteria in surrounding bone than in the tooth itself, including pathogens like Porphyromonas gingivalis, Enterobacter aerogenes, and Streptococcus mitis. And these are implicated in invading organs, including those prone to the C word, like breast tissue, prostate tissue, and pancreatic tissue. So here's the really, really important point. The tooth is dead, meaning there is the immune system has absolutely no way to reach it, has no connection to it. So the jaw, but it's still connected to the jawbone. There's no layer between them. So then the infection, which stays in the dead tooth, can keep spreading to the jawbone. And, as I said, to me, it's shocking that there's more in the jawbone than there was in the actual tooth. That kind of makes sense because the dead tooth doesn't have much good food for bacteria, whereas the jaw would. It will have nutrients and toxins and all the things that the bacteria likes to be surrounded by. So now, if it's getting into the jaw, if this TERF organization can be believed in their DNA sequencing, Do you think it might be getting into the bloodstream?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And if it's getting into the bloodstream, where does the bloodstream go?
Everywhere.
Pretty much, right?
Yeah.
There's a few places it can't get to, but almost everywhere, including the brain. If we think about the episode we did a little while ago of Dr. Perrin, where he talked about how the blood-brain barrier as this, universal barrier is a myth, because there are certain elements of the brain that have to have even quite large particles go into them, like the hypothalamus, for instance, so they can get hormone feedback. Could these organisms get through there? Absolutely. Can they get to pretty much anywhere? Absolutely. Are they especially going to go to certain places that a lot of the time people are, are implicated as C words, much more likely to have C word? Yes, this is what the research is showing. So yeah, different theories as to what's most important, but basically, so the bacteria or other infectious organisms, or talking a bit about yeasts and fungal infections, but just to stick with bacteria for a minute. So the toxins and the organisms, the pathogens, leach into the body, and what does that mean? It can cause low-grade inflammation. Now, let's just dig into that sentence for a second, actually. What is inflammation? I know I said this before, but just to remind people, inflammation is not like a magic irritation or something like it's usually talked about, even within the mainstream medical world. Inflammation is a result of your immune system's response to something. Inflammation is simply activity of your own immune system. That's the thing that's always missed or de-emphasized. And so then there's the question, why is your immune system inflaming you or parts of you, right? And then the really mainstream position might be a lack of drugs, medications. But, joking aside, that you say it's a genetic basis. Maybe they'll talk about lifestyle stuff, stress. Maybe they'll talk about diet. And all of those things may be a factor. Obviously, I believe in genetics. It's one of my, big missions. But and of course the immune system can react to allergens, right? And the immune system can start attacking your own tissues, which is usually referred to as autoimmunity. If it starts attacking your thyroid, it's called Hashimoto's. If it starts attacking your connective tissue, it's called arthritis. But now, why does all of this happen? Why is there this inflammation and allergy and intolerance and autoimmunity? And all the theories that I talked about may be partly right, lifestyle and diet and this and that and the other, genetics certainly. But what if a lot of it is just that the immune system is overstimulated because it is trying to deal with infections and is unable to do so? Either because there is some kind of biofilm protection, which we'll talk about in a minute, or even more simply, because there's a constant supply, as in the case of this root canal thing. Because as long as there's a dead tooth there, that there is no circulation, no nerve connection, and therefore no immune system connection to, the dead tooth is always going to be a place where bacteria can breed and fester, and then that can always go into the bone and circulation system. And so this is where no matter what, and when the immune system keeps fighting an infection unsuccessfully, this is where it starts to become dysregulated, and the regulatory kind of calming, stop overdoing it part of the immune system gets de-emphasized, and the attacking elements of the immune system gets overemphasized. Except for, and this is the mainstream perspective, is that's absolutely what's going on in that case, right? The immune system is being overstimulated, over-attacking in the case of autoimmunity, in the case of allergy, and that's the theory, and it's a very logical theory. But what if, but there's always that thing about like, is the body that stupid? And is it that easy to trick it into making mistakes? And in the terrain, people would say it's the toxins that are dysregulating the immune system and causing it to overdo it. It's almost certainly some truth to that as well. But what the fundamental truth that almost everyone is missing is that the immune system is overstimulated and inflammation is excessive simply because the immune system keeps trying to fight an infection, or in fact, usually a bunch of infections. Would that make any sense?
Absolutely. I mean, like how you've laid it all out right there. It's that constant agitation. So it's doing its job. But, we can't figure out and it can't figure out why it's being unsuccessful because there is something lurking under the covers that we can't see.
Yeah, because a root canal is not a natural phenomenon, remember?
No.
Tooth infection, definitely. But, for our ancestors up until recently, it would be the case of you either have the tooth pulled and you heal, or you die because the infected tooth stays in there, and maybe you kill yourself because it's like goddamn painful. It really is an awful tooth infection. But otherwise, yeah, the infection spreads and it kills you. A lot of people historically would die from dental infections. That was a really big deal. And then, yeah, there was amateur dentistry, and, there weren't like fillings and all the rest of it. It's basically you'd have to pull it out, right? Or the person would die. That was it. But there was no leaving it in there dead, like.
But it looks good.
It doesn't. It looks awful. It looks like a dead tooth in your mouth. I was saying, I think they're rarely done at the front actually because of how bad it looks. It's almost always the molars. It's almost always the rear tooth, maybe always actually. So yeah, just a little bit more of this before we move on to the next one. Dr. Boyd Haley, toxicology expert, he did his own research, found that 90% of root canal teeth host dozens of pathogens. So I know I said earlier that, this different organization tested 100% were bacterially contaminated. Okay, but this person, over 90% of them had dozens of pathogens. And again, pathogens, not just bacteria. What that means is dozens of types of bacteria that are actively harmful to the body, all resting in this innocent little root canal, So, like, am I the only one to know about this, or is Weston Price the only one to know about this? No. There was actually a documentary called Root Cause on Netflix that talked about all of this, and it was removed because of dentists complaining about it specifically, or dental organizations. I'm sure it wasn't one dentist at a time. But, it's the usual thing, right? They're scaremongering about something that's perfectly healthy. And basically they got it banned, which is very interesting, right? Because, we haven't talked that much about this, but, I think it's probably quite clear that we're believers in free speech here. And, we don't believe in, I don't believe in misinformation, disinformation, all the rest of it. I just think that, I think most mainstream perspectives are misinformation to various degrees, but I don't seek to ban the people. I just, think that we should put out better information, right? So if you think everything I just said is nonsense and you're a dentist, fine, create two Netflix documentaries about how awesome root canals are, right? And then let people see both sides. But of course, they can't do that because, as with so many of these things, it's not really justifiable when you think about it. I'd say the only way it really is justifiable, and this is the same reason I did it at the age of 21, is through cost. It's just cheaper than, even dentures, let alone an implant. It's cheaper than any kind of tooth alternative. And, otherwise, if there's too many holes in your mouth, in your jawbone, then you're not going to be able to chew food. So it's something entirely from expediency and cost. That's how I see it, and nothing to do with was actually optimal helpful. But, and I think we talked about this in the last episode, this is like an example of penny wise and pound foolish when you really look into it, because even though the cost may be low initially, I would say it's far better to have a hole in your mouth than it is to have this dead thing poisoning you. It'd be better to eat blended food for the rest of your life than to have a root canal, is the conclusion I'm getting to. As much as that isn't optimal, I'm not claiming it is, but that's how concerned I'm about root canals. Just give a few more examples. So, oh yeah, here's a good one. Weston Price did his own experiments. As I say, he was a bit of a scientist, certainly not just a dentist. Obviously, he was doing all these research on people, as I talked about, but he did some experiments. So here's one. He extracted root canal teeth from 87 ill patients. So they were ill with root canals, as people usually end up being. He then took the tooth and sterilized it externally. So did everything that you could to sterilize something, just, as they sterilize, say, medical equipment today. Then he implanted them in rabbits. And the rabbits developed the same diseases, in other words, the same C words as the donors, suggesting a bacterial transfer. And yeah, he found toxins in all of them as well. There's another person called Dr. Hal Huggins. I don't know if he's still doing the podcast circuit these days. If he is, it'd be nice to have him on. But I remember listening to one from him a long time ago. So he certainly used to. I'm sure you can find him on YouTube. Yeah, he started a whole kind of biological dentistry association, and you can go to the website and find people who are studying his work. It's pretty expensive, to be honest, from what I remember. They'll, not just do root canals and mercury fillings, but they'll make sure that the type of filling that they give you is exactly the type that your body doesn't have a reaction to, and the same with implants and stuff like that. They really, and they'll emphasize removing those bad things as safely as possible. I'm not saying every single person in his work is necessarily the best, but it seems like a very good system, at least, that works well when it is done well. So he talked about different bacteria, Gemella morbillorum, and he connected that to endocarditis, for instance, as well. Dr. Jeffrey Tennant, did we talk about him already?
No, I don't believe we have.
Okay. Dr. Jeffrey Tennant, he said that he was a C-word specialist again. He found that 96% of his patients had an infected tooth, again, on the meridian and on the side of the body, the same as the C-word that they had. So I say all this to say, I know we sometimes have people on, I don't know, Grant Genereux, who's come up with a theory and he's the only one. And I respect that. But I want to make the point that with this, that's not it. There are loads of people over the last 100 years, many of whom have worked with hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of people who have found this stunning connection, right? Because even, 60% of people having the C word, having root canals, would be statistically significant. 90% would be very interesting. When you talk about 96 to 100%, that's shocking. And this is why, it was considered credible enough to be made into a documentary that Netflix would buy in the first place. I don't think they probably commissioned it, but they bought it. They felt it was pretty, that it was not. If I did a vitamin A is a toxin documentary, to be honest, I don't think Netflix would buy it, no matter how well produced it was, because they would consider it too fringe. But this was considered, okay, there's so much evidence for this that this is good enough. And yet, so is this accurate? Obviously, I can't be sure. But what I would say is, even if you don't believe any of the people I just mentioned or cited, and that's fair enough, honestly. I try not to believe anyone either. Just think to yourself logically. Does it make sense to have a dead thing in your mouth connected to your bone and your circulatory system, and thereby to your circulatory system? It would be tooth to bone to circulatory system. That there is no way of removing the infection of. Does that sound like a good idea to you? And I think, this is why appeals to authority. I don't want to do my own version of appeal to authority, right? Because you could be like, oh, my dentist said this and Google says that. And then I'm like, oh, my experts say this, my experts say that. Let's just not do that. Let's just be rational and think for ourselves for a second. Does that sound like a good idea to you? It doesn't sound like a good idea to me.
No, exactly. And also think about it too from a point of view of it not being a tooth, something else. Would you have that anywhere else in your body? Would you it doesn't sound like it's going to be promoting health. It doesn't. And so it's also too in that way of, where you were speaking about it before, of is it something that, you need to run out and change right here in this instance? You may not be, you may be fine at this moment. But it's that also thing of, one, everything that you said and the information that you cited makes absolute sense, especially with their findings. You potentially also don't know if there are underlying things going on in your body that just aren't showing up big. So there's other things. It's like when I had the mercury fillings, I went and changed them out for the white ceramic ones. Was there anything potentially going on in my body? I didn't know, but I was doing it as a preventative measure potentially, because I could also see, because I do grind my teeth at night, and I could see where the silver was going into my guard. I thought that can't be healthy. I'm absorbing it. There's something else potentially going on. So it's food for thought.
Definitely.
For thought.
Yeah, and it's hard to know for sure if you don't have like a really serious issue, like a lot of people who end up being my clients do. But yeah, it still could be major, and it can lead to those chronic diseases. So that kind of brings us full circle then back to talking about heart disease. So this is the other. I started off with I was wrong thing, and maybe it was a little bit clickbaity, but I meant it. And so one of the things I wanted to say I was wrong about is maybe. So let's clarify that. One of them was so I did an episode on cardiovascular disease a while ago, and I still would recommend that to people because I think every single thing that I said there is accurate. And again, to really summarize it, I guess it would be to say that, things like cholesterol building up in the arteries is not like because you have too much cholesterol. It's your body's protective mechanism to the damage that it's sustaining. So basically, when your arterial walls are damaged, your body has to do something to patch them up. And one of the things it does is clotting factors and fiber and stuff like that. But if it keeps being damaged and if the tissue itself is inflamed, it will put a protective layer of cholesterol on there. But of course, the protective layer is not only cholesterol. There's also, plaque, right? And so what is plaque? Well, plaque, most people, when they think of plaque, they're going to think of what we've been talking about most of the episode, right? Your teeth, right? That's the most common area that we would be aware of plaque and be considering plaque. So what is that plaque in your teeth? Let's talk about that for a second. That's biofilm. That's a protective layer made of calcium, but a bunch of other stuff as well, that your body, that an organism creates around itself. In the case of the mouth, pretty much exclusively bacteria, creates around itself to protect itself from your body's immune system, because your body has an immune system even within your saliva. So it's kind of a protective layer of getting away from like detection and being able to be dealt with. And so that's plaque in your mouth. But what about the plaque in your arteries? What about the plaque in your heart? For some reason, that's always been thought of something different. And I remember like 15 years ago, I heard about this from someone. I think it was David Wolf, who was probably most people know him as the infomercial guys these days. But, interesting guy with interesting theories, some extreme. And but he was, on the cutting edge of a lot of stuff. Not all of it was right, but some of it was. And he talked a lot about this. And he talked about calcification as being a root cause of aging and disease. And I remember he talked about, there's a book I read in it. What was it called? The Calcium Paradox, I think, that talked about this, the calcification. And it's one of those things, and I just kind of got on with my life and kind of forgot. And I was on social media the other day and I saw this, and it was a post. Maybe we can share a link to it. I'll just read it and then we'll talk about the studies. Infections could be the real cause of heart attacks. Heart disease has long been blamed mostly on cholesterol, clogged arteries, and high blood pressure. But new research from Finland and the UK has revealed something shocking. Hidden bacterial colonies may be quietly setting the stage for heart attack. Deep inside arterial plaques, scientists have found bacterial biofilms, sticky gelatinous clusters that can lie dormant for decades. Protected from the immune system and antibiotics, they sit in silence until something wakes them up. Could be a viral infection, could be stress, but once activated, these bacteria treat inflammation so severe that the plaque can rupture. The result, a sudden blood clot and often a heart attack. Researchers detected the genetic fingerprints of oral bacteria inside the arteries of patients who had died suddenly and in those undergoing surgery for advanced atherosclerosis, plaque buildup in the cardiovascular system, in the arteries. In some cases, they even caught bacteria breaking free from the biofilm during a heart attack, with the immune system reacting in real time. Can you see now why I kind of did the segue to talk about the mouth for a while before going back to this? And again, you don't have to have a root canal for this. This is the point I was debating whether to make earlier or not. Like, if you have any infection in the mouth, it can potentially get into the bloodstream.
So I want to, because a long while ago, I had a mitral valve prolapse. And so anytime I had to have a dental cleaning or something like that, they always made me take antibiotics before the procedure.
Right.
They don't do it anymore now for that condition, and that condition is sorted itself out with me. But they still, if somebody that's very, very, very high risk, I've just looked it up here, for different things, they might still make you take it. So there is a reason.
It's interesting, right? So they know it to some degree, but they still want to treat these things with statins and all the rest of it, which have no connection to what's actually going on. There's a couple of different theories about what's going on, but like a body creating too much cholesterol is definitely not it. Anyway, let me carry on reading this. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's a good example of like where they already act like they know it, right? The discovery as a new led to understanding heart disease, yeah. And so this, so this is Viridian's streptococcal biofilm evades immune detection and contributes to inflammation and rupture of atherosclerotic plaques. American Heart Association Journal, 2025. So not exactly alternative, right? This is as mainstream as it gets. And so another study. Association between oral bacteria and Alzheimer's disease, systemic review and meta-analysis. This is from 2023. Alzheimer's, Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. And conclusion, current evidence moderately supports the association between oral bacteria and Alzheimer's disease, while the association was strong when oral bacteria were detectable in the brain. Well, wait a minute. Did you just say oral bacteria are getting into the brain in this mainstream study in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease? I think they did, Chrissy. Further evidence needs a causa relationship, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, right. They don't want to say too much more than that. And this was a meta-analysis of 16 different studies. Next, I've got a big list of them here. 1 second. Is this a different one? No, that's the same one. The research shift from focus cholesterol buildup to chronic infections as a key atherosclerosis driver, paralleling the 2005 Nobel-winning discovery of H. pylori ulcers and suggesting potential for biofilm targeting antibiotics over statins alone. Yeah, the reason I left that there actually is because to remind myself to talk about that, and then I've got a few other studies. For a long time with stomach ulcers, they thought it was stress primarily, right? And this was not completely unreasonable because they would, there was a very strong correlation between the person having especially acute levels of stress and having a stomach ulcer hospitalization. But that was more, it turned out that was more an exacerbator rather than the cause. And the assumption was that the stomach acid is so acidic between pH 1 and 2 that no bacteria could survive there. So even though the mainstream medical model tends to look for bacteria and other pathogens as causes and want to ignore toxins, that's their general bent, despite that, for stomach ulcers, they're like, it can't be that. And yet, it turned out that H. pylori was a significant causative factor. Now, I say it in that way specifically because it is true that there are many people who have H. pylori who don't have stomach ulcers. But it is also true that there's a very few people with stomach ulcers who don't have H. pylori. So it's a significant causative factor, even though on its own it doesn't necessarily lead to stomach ulcers. Well, and this is the other thing of where I have to admit I'm wrong, right? It's taken an hour for me to get to this one, but so the two things I was wrong about. First of all was about that cardiovascular disease is purely about toxins. I think I fell into the terrain theory trap now. I'm going to take that back and say there probably is a significant infectious component. I'm about to give a lot more evidence for that in a few minutes. But the second thing I think I was wrong about is sharing the kind of mainstream perspective on things, but I feel like I said it as if it is the case, so I want to correct it anyway. And the mainstream perspective is that there is this distinction between inside and outside the body. And areas that are technically outside the body can often harbor a lot of organisms, and that's okay because the body treats it as outside the body. But so examples of those areas that are technically outside the body would include the lungs, the urethral tract, the vagina, the mouth, the whole digestive tract, inside your nostrils, inside your ears, like all these areas that you may think of as inside your body, but it's not like actually beyond the barrier of your, like where your blood resides. We could put it that way to just be simple, right? So even though your small intestine, you could say, is right in the middle of your body, there's like a barrier to separate it from where blood is. And so that's often known as inside and outside the body. And so the general thinking is that areas that are technically outside the body, like all the ones I just mentioned, sinuses, digestive tract, etc., they very frequently harbor organisms, bacteria, and that's fine because the body treats it as outside the body. As soon as it gets into the body, your immune system has oh my God, and immediately goes in and deals with it. Or, you have an acute infection, which then, might require hospitalization or whatever. But like your body fiercely protects that barrier. That's the general mainstream view on this. I don't think that's 100% inaccurate, but what it misses is this point about biofilms. That yes, as soon as any pathogen, or really any organism, anything that doesn't belong there, but certainly any pathogen, gets into an area that's technically inside the body, like let's say the bloodstream, the immune system will jump on it. That is true. But what's also true is that some of these organisms have evolved ways of hiding and evading and avoiding detection. And it's this biofilm mechanism specifically. And so then when we start to look at, well, there's plaque in the arteries, what causes that? Could be infection. If there's plaque in the brain, right? So Alzheimer's, plaque in the brain. That's, to really simplify it, that's what we look at as a fundamental causative factor. What's causing that plaque in the brain? Well, I just gave an example where they're finding mouth bacteria in the brain, right? Could that be related? It's looking like the answer might be yes. If there's a buildup of not quite plaque, but calcification, and plaque is, a significant amount of its calcium, in the liver or in the kidneys, we call those liver stones or kidney stones. The kind of common alternative theory on this is that they are forming around toxins, and that may be true. But what if they're also, potentially hiding places for these bacteria? They're forming little protective barriers around themselves until they decide it's safe to break out again. And remember, these organisms have a level of patience unknown in the human world, right? They'll happily be there in a dormant state for decades, just waiting for, that they sense an opportunity. So yeah, does that make sense if I go back to some more studies?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In an ideal world, you'd meet all of your nutritional needs in the form of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and more from the foods you eat. However, unless you prepare all of your food at home from scratch using the highest quality ingredients possible, the reality is that most of us need some nutritional support. Most of us need to take supplements if we want to look, feel, and perform at our best on a consistent daily basis. And this is especially true if you have genes that give you an elevated need of certain nutrients. And this is where Feel Younger can help. What I love about Feel Younger is that they offer a huge range of quality supplements and healthcare products formulated and endorsed by Elwin Robinson, including must-haves like magnesium glycinate and vitamins B12, D3, and K2. And they do it at affordable prices with free shipping for orders over $50 without ever compromising on quality, purity, or potency. To learn more about how Feel Younger supplements can give your health a boost while supporting this podcast, please visit feelyounger.net and use promo code Rejuvenate to get 20% off your first order. That's promo code Rejuvenate for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net.
Okay. So how about this one? I wanted to mention this as well. This reminds me, another note I've got here about antibodies. I'll just read this one out. Large-scale studies show elevated antibodies to pathogens like chlamydia pneumonia, which is a respiratory bacterium usually, in about 50% of patients with atherosclerosis, far higher than healthy controls. Bacterial DNA and viable organisms have been isolated from plaques in up to 70% of cases. Bacterial DNA and viable organisms have been isolated from plaques. So someone dies of a heart attack, they dig that white stuff out there, again, they sequence it. They're actually finding not just the DNA, but the whole organism sitting in there. How much evidence do you need, right? Yeah, crazy that this is not focused on more. It's crazy that they're still giving statins when all of this is coming out. But this is the thing, often, unfortunately, the medical doctors are 10 to 20 years behind the cutting-edge scientific research, at least, at best. A 2011 GAACC review of over 20 studies concluded chronic infections correlate with plaque burden independently of traditional risk factors like LDL cholesterol. Basically, what that means is LDL cholesterol has nothing to do with it, nothing to do with the correlation between the amount of plaque and the chronic infections. It's the chronic infections that cause the plaque, not the LDL, is kind of the point there. Here's the point I was going to make about this, about the antibodies. So they've known about the antibodies for a while. I remember reading Dr. Gundry's book, whenever that was, 6 years ago, something like that. Dr. Gundry became very famous and popular for a while, for a few things, but I think the thing he's most known for is talking about lectins. And so he was a heart surgeon who would do open heart surgery on people, and he would remove all this white gunk from their heart. That's what he talked about. And he noticed the correlation between the person having that and them having had an infection in the past. And his big theory about it, as far as I remember from the book, is that the organisms had dysregulated the immune system, and that the immune system was now targeting and attacking that heart tissue because it had a similar fingerprint or code or whatever you want to call it to those organisms. Again, that may be true, but the simpler explanation may just be that the reason why almost everyone who he had to do open heart surgery on had originally had some kind of infection. I can't remember what it was. It might have even been the same one, the chlamydia. No, I think it was streptococcus, actually. Anyway, whatever it was, I think it was strep throat. I think it was strep throat that he said almost everyone had. It may be the antibody thing, or it may just be that those bacteria got into the circulatory system, not that difficult, but the immune system wasn't able to deal with them. That's the thing that's more, up until recently anyway, by the look of it, scientifically disputed. And then that it built biofilms around itself, and it carried on building biofilms around itself until it caused the person to, almost die of a heart attack. Okay. Another study here with oral bacteria. Porphyromonas gingivalis. I think we talked about that a second ago, but here's another study. And other gum disease pathogens are linked to a 2 to 3 times higher CVD risk, basically cardiovascular disease risk. A 2012 NIH review of 20 plus cohort studies found Periodontal infections independently predict subclinical atherosclerosis and clinical events like stroke. 2025 Tampere study extended this to viridians streptococci, showing biofilms and coronary plaques trigger rupture via cytokine storms. So basically, these are just two different bacteria found at two different times. 2 to 3 times higher risk of cardiovascular disease, like a heart attack or a stroke, basically, to be simple. This one's interesting as well. Epidemiological links to acute events. Childhood infections like scarlet fever, tonsillitis correlate with adult atherosclerosis in 11 of 12 case control studies, suggesting early life seeding of plaques. A 2021 hypothesis paper posits that recurrent bacterial exposures combined with dietary excess, e.g. meals that feed biofilms, explain 30 to 50% of coronary cases. A 2024 PMC analysis of global data argues infections are a major cause of acute myocardial infarction, heart attack, citing inflammation markers in 60% of AMI patients matching bacterial profiles. I could go on, but you get the idea. There's actually loads of evidence for this. Although you do hear about other things like strep throat and tonsillitis and scarlet fever, the word that you'll keep hearing over and over again is dental pathogens. Like if you look at, I've just selected a handful here, but and as I said, I think they've known about that connection for a while, but it was thought more that say a chronic gum infection would dysregulate the immune system, and that's what would cause the cardiovascular disease. It's now looking like it's just the infectious agent itself. It's as simple as that. Now, there's also viral infections. I've got a big list of those, but I'm tempted to skip those because I'm not as interested in viruses. But there is another thing I am interested in, and I want to do an episode on this at some point, Chrissy, and it's Candida. Candida, yeast, fungal infections, whatever you want to call it. So I was like, there is it Dr. Simoncini, who believes that the C word is created by your body as a response to fungal infections specifically. And there's a theory that's kind of done the rounds and is reasonably popular in the alternative health world, but not in the mainstream world. So I was like, let me see if I can find evidence for the connection between fungal infections and this heart disease, potentially, as it seems like, I don't know what it is that with the C word, the fact I have to say the C word, there's so many entrenched interests in not seeing that in a different way. For whatever reason with heart disease, I don't know if the lobbying is not strong or whatever, but there seems to be more openness to exploring other potential causes. So I was like, let me just look to see if there's mainstream, connection between these fungal, yeast, whatever infections and heart disease, and there's loads. So I'll read to you a few of them. Fungal DNA and viable organisms. So again, not because the thing with PCR tests and DNA is when you look into how they do the testing, you can kind of, if you were trying to debate the other side, go, they're not sure, right? Like just because you see pieces of the DNA doesn't mean that there's definitely was bacteria there, or there definitely was fungal infection there. But I just want to clarify this point. Yeah, they're finding the DNA easily, but they're often finding the whole organism. They're finding the whole bacteria. They're finding the whole yeast thing as well. So I'll read this again. Fungal DNA and viable organisms have been identified in coronary and carotid plaques, suggesting translocation from gut/oral reservoirs via the bloodstream, where they embed and invade immunity. That really sums up what I spent quite a long saying in one sentence. So a 2015 study analyzed 41 coronary plaques from chronic heart disease patients using PCR, histology, and culture being the real organisms. Fungal DNA was detected in 27% not a majority, but still quite a lot, considering that, as I said, the mainstream position was that there would be zero bacteria in the cardiovascular system. We're sequencing identifying the classic Candida albicans in 50% of positives. So sure enough, Candida, the same one that the alternative health world has focused on so long, and the specific strain that they usually focus on, albicans, the most common thing found. Another one, 2007 German study, used pan-fungal PCR on 38 coronary plaques and found fungal rDNA signatures in 92%, including Aspergillus, which is more of a mold, Candida, and Penicillium. This high rate positions fungi as a potential non-specific contributor to chronic inflammation independent of bacteria. So bacteria is generally more focused on, and I don't know, actually viruses, I guess, with the V industry. But yeah, it's definitely bacteria and viruses. Far less focused on is parasites and Candida, which is maybe why, as a kind of reaction, the alternative world often focuses more on Candida and parasites. But yeah, so they're kind of saying in this study that, that maybe actually this is a thing. This is a significant factor. Another one, 2014 study, Candida in 32% of plaques. Another one, 2020 systemic review, a meta-analysis of 28 studies on coronary artery microorganisms found pathogens in 40 to 60% overall. And fungi were detected about 25% with different Candida species most commonly. So not as strong as bacteria, and this may be because the fungal infections tend to be more in the gut, the digestive tract, and not as much in the mouth. And the bacterial infections are more in the mouth. So it really does seem to be the mouth that, again, is the primary culprit. But it could be like 60-40, between the two of them, like the mouth, then the gut. And then the mouth has got many bacteria, so that, shows up more often. The gut is like quite high level of often both. And so that would be my theory as to why it's more common. But I was just interested to see that it's there at all, right? And what's another one? 2024 review posits Candida contributes to atherosclerosis by vascular inflammation, citing plaque biopsies with yeast forms. So again, biopsy of plaque. So they take the plaque out of the person who's had a heart attack, and they see this organism. So now I got that from a study, but that's an interesting way of looking at it to me. It's like, okay, so the organism causes the inflammation, and then the inflammation causes the plaque. It's like, why can't it just be that the organism causes the plaque, given the tendency of organisms to create biofilms? I don't know why they don't want to view it that way. It may be because it's not that way. I'm open to always being wrong, but it seems to me that it's more because they have to, like, if it's that the organism causes the inflammation causes the plaque, then they can still address the plaque by taking statins and all the usual medications. Whereas if the plaque is a direct creation of the organism, it's foolish to deal with any of those drugs. The only thing that would actually make sense would be to try and find solutions that would, I guess, break down biofilms, which already exist, by the way. Maybe we should do a quick how-to before we finish. But then ultimately dealing with the infections,
Absolutely. Yeah, because, everything you've said, it's definitely got my brain thinking. It's got me going, ooh, there's a lot more to consider here that I really hadn't put two and two together before on. One, thank God I don't have a root canal, but I know a lot of people that do, and it's then starting to think, okay, are there other things that we really need to look at? Because you've given a supply of so many studies, so and they've found incredible results, really, showing so much evidence that these bacteria are traveling with consequence. Yeah.
I don't think there's anyone who looks into it who goes, no, there's never been any signs of any bacteria or fungi or whatever in plaque. Like it's indisputed. So the only question is, so yeah, should we finish with what do you do about
Yes,
it?
absolutely.
Well, so if you have a root canal, I would recommend removing it. I would recommend removing it the right way, which would be, with a holistic dentist. Preferably, they'll do some kind of ozone, for instance, to really clean out the area. Preferably, they'll do maybe something like PRP, platelet-rich plasma, which helps in the healing process. They're going to be, equipped and able to give you the antibiotics that are necessary, because if the infection has spread to the bone, and then you expose it, it's good. It can make it slower to heal potentially. And I would say antibiotics, that doesn't have to be medication. It can be maybe herb or something. That can depend on what practitioner you're going to, but they're going to need to do something. If you go to the most basic dentist who just wants to pull it out and leave you to it, that may be okay actually with a normal extraction, but I would say is not ideal with a root canal extraction specifically. So I guess the simple answer to that, because I'm not an expert dentist and I don't claim to be, is to find a holistic dentist. But like ways of narrowing it down might be some of the things I just said. Like if you look for someone who does ozone and PRP, that will help narrow it down for you.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, because you talk about it traveling to the jawbone, and forgive my ignorance here. Would somebody with the infection, are they going to feel pain in there? Are there going to be signs and symptoms that it has moved, or is it more underlying and there's not such an easy connection?
It's a great question. The mainstream perspective is no. But when I talk to people anecdotally who have root canals, they're like, yeah, I get tension there. Sometimes there's swelling. Sometimes there's irritation, unexplained. And often they'll blame it on something else. For me, for instance, I had some discomfort and they blamed it on, what was it? That my gum had receded too much and that like some of the tooth and leaf was exposed. Anyway, I don't want to talk about too much of my experience, but yeah, tension, pain, discomfort are not necessarily going to be there, but they may well be there. Obvious things might be raised lymph glands, especially on the same side as the root canal, stuff like that. But none of that stuff is necessarily going to be present, because it's a chronic infection, not an acute infection. So a lot of people have infections. A lot of people have pathogens in their digestive tract and they don't really notice anything. They're not aware of anything, but it's subtly maybe it's creating some kind of toxin that's then causing brain fog, but they just don't make that connection. So the tricky thing is that you can't make the connection. Obviously, if you're in optimal health, then but people rarely are.
No, I was going to say, so definitely try to find a holistic dentist, somebody that knows about this, believes in this, like you said, does the PRP, does the ozone, and, can also give you some advice. And
Yep.
they've done this, it's part of their belief system and their practice.
Yes. Yeah. I don't want to talk too much about my personal experience, but I'll just say this. So, as I said, in over 10 years of trying to convince every dentist that I wanted it removed, and in this case, the person who finally did it, the dentist who finally did it, I got the X-ray done they asked for, but there was some problem on my phone and it wouldn't load. It was like some login or something, and they're like, "Oh, don't worry about it. We'll just do it." I think that was lucky, because every other person, when they saw that X-ray, they said to me, "Oh, it looks perfect." Now, here's the thing. When he pulled it out, he's like, "Oh, there's loads of inflammation under there." And he had to dig for a while and, clean it. It was very unpleasant, right? It's bad enough having a tooth pulled out, but then having a bunch of necrotic tissue dug out as well. It's disgusting. But that's what was necessary in this so-called perfect root canal that every dentist I'd seen, including holistic dentists, all told me was absolutely perfect. So yeah, you're going to have to find someone who, but as you just said, Chrissy, believes what I am saying, that root canals are innately a problem, which is tricky because most dentists have done them and do them. And so it requires a level of humility, which I try to model at the beginning of this episode of, as a dentist, to admit that you're wrong. But of course, it's trickier for them because they've got, all the money that they've put into learning it and the time they've put into learning it, and the liability. If they start saying to everyone, oh, root canals are really dangerous, they might kill you, then they'd be opening themselves up to legal action from everyone they gave a root canal up until that point, right?
Yeah.
So even if they totally get what I'm saying, they may not admit it to you. Like, probably the most you're going to get out of them is, it's your decision, sir or madam, and if you'd like to do it, then I'd be willing to do it, right? But probably if they say that to you, it's because they know it's not a good thing, but they're not able to say it. Unfortunately, that's the way that it is my understanding. There's a strong component to this. And also, every dentist, doctor, all of us, they are dependent on being able to practice on these regulatory bodies, professional bodies, which supervise them. And so the other thing is, if they start telling people that root canals are dangerous, they may get the same treatment as this Netflix documentary, right? They may be cancelled. They may lose their job, lose their career, lose their whatever. So don't be too harsh on your dentist if he or she doesn't get this. Just be grateful if they're willing to help you, would be my view on this. And then, talking about the plaques. So in terms of cholesterol element of plaque, which is significant, I think everything that I already said before in the cardiovascular episode still stands. But in terms of the calcification element to it, what I would want to add to it is, there are some things that are effective at breaking down that calcification. And I think we'll do an episode soon, Chrissy, where we talk about Candida, because if you really breaking down Candida biofilm is very difficult, and in the process of doing that, you would also break down bacterial biofilm. So we might as well cover that all in one go. But just a couple of things that people could think of to start off with is some of the enzymes, specifically nattokinase and serrapeptase. And I'm very happy to say the cardiovascular formula I created, which I think we linked in that episode, getcardioshield.com if you're interested. It does contain, a decent amount of nattokinase. And so that's good. It was already working in this mechanism, even if I wasn't aware of the specific infectious component. Serrapeptase is another good one, though. And there's other ones, like this lumbrokinase, pretty similar to nattokinase. The other things that are often recommended, like the quercetin and the curcumin, those are more working on like reducing inflammation specifically, as opposed to breaking up biofilm. In terms of things that break up biofilm in the arteries, that's what I'm aware of is the most effective. The other thing would be EDTA or DMSA, especially EDTA though over DMSA. But again, if you're taking it orally, it's mainly going to break up digestive biofilm. So if you wanted it to break up biofilm in your circulatory system, then you would need to use like IV EDTA, which they normally only do to people with kind of proven heavy metal poisoning, or what's it called? Not transdermal, sublingual EDTA. That you hold it in your mouth for a few minutes, it goes straight into your bloodstream. Sublingually, that would be another way of doing it. EDTA, however, chelates all kinds of essential minerals as well as breaking up biofilm. And so, my preference for this really would be, primarily the enzymes like nattokinase and serrapeptase. And some people, when they take them, they do get like side effects to it, of various kinds. And it can be because it's disrupting the oral biofilm. It can be because it's disrupting the digestive biofilm. And that's the most likely thing. But it could even be because it's disrupting that arterial biofilm. And one tip would be, if you, just in general, but especially if you want it to work on arterial biofilm, then you would take it not with food. You would have it on an empty stomach in between meals. And I say that to just, because the natural thing that most people, when they hear about this, they're like, oh, what antibiotic can I take? Or if they don't like medications, they're like, oh, what, herbal antibiotic can I take, right? And I say the challenge is, if an antibiotic was able to kill it, then your immune system will be able to kill it. Because again, things really aren't supposed to be existing in the arteries. The problem is that the biofilm is completely encasing and protecting them from the immune system. And it's also completely encasing and protecting them from the antibiotic as well. So unfortunately, that's not good enough. You've got to break up the biofilm, and that's like the primary mechanism. But those are very good. Nattokinase is very good at specifically as well breaking down excessive clotting. Serrapeptase is very good at breaking down excessive fibrin, which is this protein-like web that keeps the clotting and plaque and stuff in place. And it's used by your body to heal tissues initially, but that's often what it ends up doing in the case of cardiovascular disease. So yeah, that would really be my simple starting place, either in a formula like CardioShield, or you can just buy those on their own.
Those are really great recommendations, Elwin. I have to say, this episode has really, as I said before, it's got me thinking. It really does, because I just didn't think about the constant agitation that if we do have this, what that's putting your system through day in, day out. And also too, where we've always worked and looked at and finding that root cause, especially something that you just don't know. It's like, it's silent, it's undetected. It's that thing that you just don't even know it's doing it, but yet you're feeling it someplace else in the body, and you can't quite put two and two together. So for me, I'm hoping that our listeners, if they're having something that is this chronic condition, and this is spurred something in them, a thought process to say, maybe this is the cause that I've been unable to find, and maybe this could be the answer.
Absolutely. And if that's the case, changing your diet, probably is not going to do it. And a new exercise regime, it's probably not. It might, it might, because if you optimize the general function of your body enough, then that can be enough to get your immune system. If you're very sedentary and you start moving, maybe your lymph starts unclogging, and then your immune system starts working better. And it's all possible. I don't want to make it seem like with this biofilm, it is 100% impossible for your immune system to get to, but it's very difficult, and this is the point I guess I started with that I'll just finish with, which is just going back to simple things like diet and lifestyle and exercise and circadian entrainment and sleep and stress and all the rest of it, is great if you've been following that your whole life, and you are very unlikely to get any of these chronic problems. But if you haven't been doing that for decades, or let's say even 1 decade, depending on how badly you were breaking all the rules, a lot of stuff may have built up, whether it's toxins, whether it's biofilms protecting organisms constantly, stressing your body, whether it's nutritional deficiencies, whatever, that then just going back to doing all the right lifestyle stuff may not be, including, eating well, may not be enough for. So just bear that in mind. And I say that because, I so often hear from people like, oh, I've been doing everything right and it's not working. And sometimes they say, in fact, it's even making me feel worse, and it's very demoralizing and demotivating. A lot of people have a lot of kind of magical thinking in terms of like, something, if I'm suffering right now, it's because I did something wrong, like God's punishing me kind of thing. And unfortunately, if that's true, it works in way larger time cycles than most people think in, so meaning if you think you're suffering now as punishment for something you did, it may be, but it's probably the fact that you were abusing your body 20 years ago, not the fact you're like trying to eat a healthy diet now. It's like it's much older sins that you're currently suffering from, probably. Although sometimes people go on what they think is a healthy diet, and they really are making themselves suffer and making things worse. So it's definitely a generalization. But yeah, like don't become, demoralized when all that stuff doesn't work. It doesn't mean that it's hopeless. It doesn't mean that you're being punished. It just means that there may be a different angle you haven't looked from. That's, as you just said, Chrissy. And that's why I wanted to bring this today before I shared my own personal experience, because I'm like, let's at least share like the studies and the research and the theories and get people thinking about it.
I'm really glad you did, because yeah, you've definitely got me thinking. So No, thank you. Thank you for that. I'm sorry that you've had to go through everything that you've had to go through and it's taken you so long to get here.
Yeah, honestly, I've known for years this is an issue, and it's the mouth, and then other things, and we talked about it before we started even recording these podcasts, Chrissy, and I said, I have a plan, but I have to be very patient. It can't all be resolved at once. I just had my lead tested the other day because it's so easy where I am now. It costs like way less than it was, and all the rest of it, and it's exactly the same as it was 6 months ago. It's like it's exactly the same level. And again, it'd be easy to be demoralized by that, but I understand what it is. It's like that's the level my body's decided it's tolerable to have, and then every time I clear some away, it releases some more from the bones, and like that seems to be the level that it's keeping it at. And it has gone down over the years, but I just give that as one example of where I've just had to be patient, right? I had a plan, whatever it was, 4 years ago now, to reduce my lead. It's still not zero. It's still right at the top of that 98th percentile reference range, but it is what it is, and it's still a hell of a lot better than it was before. So yeah, sticking to that long-term plan sometimes is necessary if you've got chronic health issues. I guess I'll finish by saying if you do have one of these challenges that you've been suffering with a long time, go and check out Advanced Health Genetics. I've added the consultation thing. I'm trying to see more people at the moment and work with more people on especially complex issues. It's okay to come with me if you've got something simple, but especially if you have something challenging that no one else has been able to help, go and check that out, advancedhealthgenetics.com, and then there's a consultation tab.
Fantastic and lovely listeners, as always, thank you so much for joining us. Please remember to leave your comments below, or even just, something, an emoji, something that tells us that you're listening, and also the algorithm, because that really, really does help. And also, Advanced Health Genetics, help our sponsors, help us so that we can continue to bring this to you free of charge. And as always, it's lovely having you here, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed that, I recommend watching our latest episode, which you can do by clicking above. And make sure to subscribe, like the video, comment, and share with anyone who you think might appreciate it. Thank you.